Fear is something all of us experience. It's a natural part of being human and plays a key role in survival. When we sense a threat, our bodies react in predictable ways. These reactions, like sweating, a racing heart, and a rush of adrenaline, make us more alert and ready to deal with danger. This response is often called the fight or flight reaction. It's our body's way of getting ready to either stand our ground or escape. This automatic reaction has likely been an essential part of our survival for thousands of years. What's fascinating is how personal fear can be. It's not just a one-size-fits-all feeling. Fear shares some of the same brain chemistry as emotions like happiness and excitement. In certain situations, we might even enjoy the feeling of fear. Think of the thrill of a scary movie. Some people even seek out fear, actively engaging in high-risk activities like extreme sports. For others, though, fear is something to avoid at all costs. But have you ever thought about where this instinctive fear comes from? In nature, animals tend to avoid things they've never seen before because they sense danger, even if they haven't experienced it yet. Humans are no different. From a young age, we learn to be afraid of certain creatures, especially the dangerous ones, like scorpions, centipedes, and spiders. We don't have to be taught to fear them, we just do. And yet, harmless creatures, like grasshoppers, don't trigger that same reaction. It's almost like a built-in understanding. I came across an answer to this mystery once, and it stuck with me. About 30 years ago, I found myself in a remote, poverty-stricken country, working as a teacher. The goal was to help the locals understand the wider world, through lessons in culture, geography, history, and science. My job was to be a bridge, showing them what was beyond their borders. The first few months felt like pure torture. The heat, 40 degrees Celsius, was unbearable, and the language barrier made it even harder. But every time I saw the curious spark in the children's eyes, or the farmers' faces light up when I told them about life beyond their village, I felt an invisible force pushing me forward. Despite the exhaustion, I couldn't quit. I had to keep going. I stayed at the school where I taught, along with a few other team members. The school wasn't what you'd think of as grand. It was made of basic materials like brick and cement. But in this region, it was seen as a luxury. The roof had tiles, though there were leaks, which I'd patch up when they came. The school had 2 floors, making it the tallest building in the whole area. Sometimes, while fixing the roof, I'd just stare out at the vast field stretching to the horizon. The view was incredible, and I knew I would probably never see anything like it again. Without even realizing it, I had started to fall in love with this land. The government offered me several chances to return home, shifting priorities away from this country. Foreign aid was no longer a focus. But every time, I turned it down. My colleagues had all gone back, but I stayed, believing I was doing it out of love for this village. In hindsight, though, I realized I stayed because I liked being admired. Back home, I was just another bookworm, insignificant. Here, I was someone special. Maybe I should have left, but I couldn't let go of that sense of importance. Once everyone else had gone, I hired a local woman, Kabihoy, to help me communicate. They called her the ugliest woman in the village, but don't let that fool you, she wasn't ugly. Her hair curled gently, and her amber-brown eyes sparkled. Her face, framed by perfect eyebrows, was a beauty in itself. At 1.65 meters tall, she towered over most of the women in the village, and her figure was graceful, like a statue from the Renaissance. But in their eyes, she didn't fit the village's beauty standards. For them, beauty meant dark skin, tiny stature, and sagging breasts. According to their standards, Kabihoy really was ugly. Even with all the cultural differences, I found my work and personal life going smoothly. Over time, Kabihoy and I became close, and after 6 months of working together, we decided to marry in the village. It was my way of telling everyone, I'm staying here. Despite the hardships, this small, beautiful village had become my home. Our wedding followed the local traditions, but it was a bit different from what I was used to. Sure, the ceremony had similarities to Christian weddings, but instead of vows like for better or worse, for richer or poorer, they had their own version, until death is the final point for both of us. At first, I thought the meaning was the same. But it only took a month for me to understand what it truly meant. That month also marked the start of a viral fever that began spreading worldwide. Even though this country rarely got hit by global outbreaks, its weak healthcare system made it vulnerable. With no proper isolation for patients and poor government management, the virus reached our small village. One of my students, Kun, a simple farmer who never missed a class, fell victim to the disease. But what happened next changed everything for me. I'll never forget that day. It was pouring rain. I saw Kun's wife, holding his lifeless body, wailing in grief. At first, I thought it was just normal mourning. Anyone would be heartbroken after losing their spouse. But then I realized she wasn't crying for him, she was crying for herself. Kabihoy, my wife, explained to me that the village had an old tradition. The vow until death is the final point for both of us meant that when one spouse died, the other would be buried alive alongside them. I was stunned. My mind couldn't comprehend it. How could something so barbaric still exist in this day and age? I thought to myself. I took Kabihoy back home, but the thought of that awful tradition gnawed at me. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, I was woken by the loud voices of the villagers. When I stepped outside, I saw them holding torches, their faces smeared with what looked like fresh blood. They carried spears, machetes, and crude weapons. They no longer looked like simple farmers, they looked like a cult. It reminded me of the white-robed fanatics I had heard about on the radio. They marched in a long line, and at the end of it, I saw Kun's wife. Her head, hands, and feet had been severed, and her body was impaled on a wooden cross. My stomach turned. I collapsed, throwing up in the grass. This was the fate of those who tried to escape this horrific custom. Kun's wife had tried to run, fleeing on a raft, but the villagers caught her and executed her. From that moment on, I couldn't shake the fear that gripped me every time my wife showed the slightest sign of illness. I feared for Kabihoy, but more than that, I feared for myself. And then, I learned something even more chilling. That night, as I lay in bed, Kabihoy admitted that she was the one who had reported Kun's wife's escape attempt. She had betrayed her. In that moment, all the love I had for my wife twisted into something dark. The future I had once imagined with her in this village evaporated. I wanted to leave so badly, to return home. But war, the pandemic, and closed borders made it impossible. I could only hope that the international airport, or at least the border, would reopen soon so I could escape. As fate would have it, Kabihoy, too, fell ill to the plague. For a week, I tried everything I could to save her. I used all my medical knowledge and bought every medicine I could find, hoping she would recover. Our neighbor, Shar, found out she was sick and started visiting us every day. Without asking me, he'd climb over the wall and sneak into our home. Then, the moment I dreaded the most came. Kabihoy died in our bed at midnight, after battling the illness for more than a week. As she took her last breath, she grasped my hand with her frail fingers and whispered, "Until death is our final destination." I couldn't believe it. How had this blessing for a couple turned into a curse, a death sentence for me, too? I couldn't accept it. At first, I thought about keeping her death a secret for a few days, trying to figure out what to do next. But as I turned toward the door, I saw Night peering through the small window, lit by the faint moonlight. I rushed to open the door and saw Shar climbing down from the second floor, scaling the wall, and running toward the village center. That's when I knew I couldn't hide it anymore. If I did, I had no idea what the villagers would do to me. The next morning, I told the villagers about my wife's death. I also realized I wouldn't have long to wait before I joined her on that final path. The village elder performed the necessary rituals, and then Shar, along with a few strong men, brought a coffin to my door. This wasn't like any coffin I had ever seen. It had 2 spaces. I knew exactly what awaited me if I refused to die alongside my wife. But even though I didn't want to accept it, there was no choice but to comply. I packed a small bag, just the essentials, a torch, a lighter, some dried food, and a machete I often used to clear the weeds around our home. I arranged everything carefully, placing my teaching books on top. I told them I wanted to take my knowledge with me to the afterlife. They didn't question it. Once everything was set, I climbed into the coffin, lying down beside my wife's cold body. The scent of lemongrass, musk, and wildflowers filled the air, an odor that has stayed with me ever since. The lid was sealed, and then, darkness swallowed me. I felt the coffin lift, rising and falling with each step of the bearers. In that moment, I recalled the stories Cabihoy had told me, how the dead were placed in coffins and dropped into a vast, unknown well, where something below would take care of the rest. But when I asked her about the well's location, she only remained silent. For about an hour, the coffin was carried through the village. Occasionally, it was lowered, then lifted again, likely as the bearers switched due to the weight. Eventually, we came to a halt. In the distance, I could hear the haunting sounds of gongs and cymbals. I knew that this was the end of my journey. Fear gripped me as I realized this was where I would die. When the gongs fell silent, chaos erupted inside the coffin. Cabihoy's body collapsed onto me, and I quickly shoved it away, securing it with my legs so it wouldn't topple again. That's when I realized the coffin was in free fall. I grabbed the cushion inside the coffin, wrapping it around myself while keeping her body in place with my leg. The fall lasted about 10 seconds before we hit the bottom. The impact was violent. Once more, Cabihoy's body toppled onto me. I quickly shoved her away. A nausea-inducing sensation overwhelmed me, the same as being in a fast-moving elevator. Then the coffin jolted again. I felt dampness seeping into my feet and realized this was a water-filled well. In a panic, I reached into my bag for the machete, hoping to pry open the lid, but a sudden instinct held me back. The coffin was too narrow for me to be sure whether the lid was floating on the water's surface or if the coffin had flipped upside down. The sensation of drifting suggested we were floating, but the terrifying thought crossed my mind: what if the coffin had overturned? I struck the lighter, desperate for light. The flame flared briefly before searing my face. There was no doubt about it, the coffin had flipped. I quickly shifted my weight to Cabihoy's side to tilt the coffin. With all my strength, I flipped it back upright. I checked the lighter again, and this time, the flame pointed upward. Using my machete, I began prying at the nails securing the lid. But as I reached into my bag for the blade, a cold grip seized my arm. I froze. I turned the lighter's glow toward Cabihoy's face. Her eyes were open. A wave of terror hit me like a physical blow. I shoved her body aside, resumed working on the coffin, and loosened the nails with trembling hands. I pressed hard, breaking the remaining seals. The coldness inside the coffin hit me immediately. My body heat had kept the outside chill at bay, but now, the air was bone-numbing. I grabbed the torch, unwrapped the plastic to prevent the kerosene from evaporating, and lit it. The flame barely illuminated the space. The darkness swallowed everything. In the dim light, I saw what looked like an underground river, a vast, dark cave with a winding waterway, much like the descriptions of a newly discovered cave system, ancient and filled with strange flora. Then I heard something, a sound in the distance. A roar. Shit! Panic surged through me as the realization hit. I was being carried toward a waterfall. I tried to leap from the coffin, but it was already too late. The coffin dropped. Thankfully, it wasn't a great height, but it was enough to break my leg. I screamed, my voice echoing through the cavern. The torch still burned nearby. My machete lay beside me. I crawled toward the light, every movement sending jolts of pain through my body. After a few painful steps, I heard something, a noise, and then, a pale figure darted past my right side. I whispered, "What the hell was that?" Fear spiked in me, and I crawled faster, desperate to get to the light. Finally, I reached the torch. I turned, holding the flame toward the darkness, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was chasing me. What I saw froze my blood. It stood in front of me, its body pale, lifeless. Its skin was unnaturally white, its limbs emaciated. Its teeth were small and jagged, like a child's, one who had lost most of their baby teeth. Its eyes, cloudy, completely white. The thing wore traditional village clothing. As I raised the torch, it recoiled, screeching in fear. And then, in the flickering light, I saw more of them, 3 or 4, moving toward Cabihoy. One of them was holding her hand and biting into it. Adrenaline surged, overriding the pain in my broken leg. I scrambled to my feet, hopping forward. With every 2 steps, I turned the torch behind me. And with every 2 steps, their numbers grew. They chanted in a language I couldn't understand. I screamed and backed away, holding the torch as a feeble defense. Terror and disgust overwhelmed my senses as I watched in horror, Cabue's arm being torn from her body and devoured by the creatures. Then I felt it, the empty air behind me. I had backed myself to the edge of a cliff. The last thing I saw before I fell were their faces, those white, soulless eyes and jagged teeth. Their expressions were frozen in a grotesque, hungry leer. I had no idea how long I was unconscious. The first thing I became aware of was a frog landing on my face. The light of dawn filtered through tall blades of grass, and as I groggily stirred, I lazily reached up to brush the frog off my mouth. When I finally sat up, I realized I was beside a small stream, about 3 meters wide, its banks lined with pebbles. I had no memory of how I had ended up here, or even where here was. But when I looked down at myself, I saw just how badly my leg had been broken. My ankle was swollen and bruised, deep purple and dark red. Even the slightest movement sent a sharp wave of pain shooting up my leg. My body was caked in dried blood and dirt, the remnants of the chaos I'd been through. The adrenaline had long since faded, and now the pain felt like 100 times worse. I forced myself to drag my body along the stream, inching forward, rest after painful rest, until the sun began to sink below the horizon. Every so often, I would stop and catch my breath, the sharp rocks and pebbles tearing at my skin, leaving countless cuts in their wake. During one of my breaks, I scooped up a handful of pebbles, stuffing them into my shirt. I had no idea why, perhaps hoping they would be useful later. That's when I spotted it, a small chunk of gold, about the size of my thumb. In my current state, though, I would have traded it for food any day. I wanted to stop, to rest longer, but I knew I couldn't afford to. If I stopped moving, I would die out here. The dark haunted me like a shadow, a reminder of everything I'd just survived. As the day waned, an unshakable instinct drove me forward, telling me that if I didn't move faster, once the sun set, it would be the end. And then, just as I was starting to lose hope, I saw a figure in the distance. Relief should have flooded my chest, but I hesitated. What if it was one of the villagers? If it was, my fate wouldn't be any different than what I had already escaped. But after everything I had been through, seeing another white man in this forsaken place felt like a sign from above. His name was Anderson, and he had come to this land searching for gold. After helping to bandage my wounds and split my leg with 2 wooden sticks, I begged him to take me to the embassy so I could return home. He hesitated, glancing at his scattered mining gear. That's where I remembered the chunk of gold I had found. I pulled it from my pocket and handed it to him. He bit into it to test its authenticity, and when he confirmed it was real, he grinned and agreed to take me to safety. The rest of my story is simple. I received medical care, the embassy helped me, and eventually, I made it back home. But when the people at the embassy asked me what had happened in that village, I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. For one thing, my story sounded too insane. Who would believe me? But more importantly, I didn't want to relive it. So I gave them a short, fabricated version, that I had fallen off a cliff and had been lucky to be rescued by a gold prospector. But I did ask them about something, the phrase those creatures had spoken in unison. When translated, it meant, "Stay with us. This is the final stop." They laughed it off, joking that the villagers must have just wanted me to stay. But I knew the truth. Those creatures had once been villagers themselves, thrown down into that well, just like I had been. If I had stayed, I would have become one of them. I would have turned into something unrecognizable, a part of whatever horror lingered beneath that place. I was lucky. I had escaped. I hadn't given up. And most importantly, I hadn't understood their language. When I returned home, I went back to teaching at the high school. I married a fellow teacher, and for a while, it seemed like life would return to normal. But it didn't. I became obsessed with light. At night, I had to turn on every light in the house before I could sleep. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but my wife and I slept in separate rooms. She understood, since she knew the whole story from before we married. After all, who could comfortably sleep beside someone who needed every single light on at night? Years passed, and I still occasionally searched for any information about that village. But there was nothing. No records, no documents, No mention of their customs or rituals. It was like that place had never existed. And even now, I wonder, what was that well? What did it look like? Where was it? The reason I'm telling you this today is because of my son, Jack. He, too, has an inexplicable fear of the dark. One night, while my wife was putting him to bed, she accidentally turned off his nightlight after he had fallen asleep. In the middle of the night, we were both jolted awake by his terrified screams. We rushed into his room, finding him thrashing in his bed, shouting in pure panic. His voice trembled as he cried, "They have pale, empty eyes. Their jagged teeth, don't let them get close. Turn on the lights." Here's the strangest part. I had never told him my story. Only my wife knew, and that had been years ago. She and I locked eyes, both of us struck with shock and fear. Could my memories, my nightmares, have somehow been passed down to him? Could this be how we evolve? By inheriting the fears of those who came before us, warnings of dangers that they faced? I am still documenting everything, trying to understand. And you, do you have a fear that you cannot explain?